Hello YouTube. Let's look at the Roman Empire and find very interesting things that not commonly known. The Roman politician and general Caesar wrote and released commentaries on his military triumph in the Bello Gallico, which translates to on the Gallic War. In the writings of the famous commander and ruler Gaius Julius Caesar, there is an interesting fact that confirms the legends of Atlantis and its incredible technologies. Caesar wrote that a Druid priest told him a story about the distant ancestors of the Gauls who arrived in Europe from the mysterious island of Crystal Towers. According to the description, this island was located in the middle of the sea in the central part of the Atlantic Ocean. Ships sometimes sailed past this island, but if they tried to cross a certain border, invisible forces captured them and they disappeared forever. And this was the tradition. At the same time, the Celtic sagas called this inexplicable force a magic web. One saga tells about a man who still managed to leave the island of Crystal Towers and return home. The 3 days spent in the palace turned out to be actually a time period of 33 years. Well, I think there is a bad translation lost somewhere thousands of years ago. The reference has to be to the island of glass towers, and we may be looking at the mysterious Avalon. From the Old Welsh Unis Avalach or Avalonau, island of apple trees, the lost Druidic books of Ferirt and the writings of Pridian, both described as older than the flood, celebrated the return of King Arthur from Avalach, where all the rest of humanity was suppressed. Avalon is undoubtedly the British version of Atlantis, with its grove of sacred apple trees tended by the Hesperides, the daughters of Atlas, that is Atlantis. Avalon now was the name of the Celtic goddess of gardens, which confirms the connection of the Hesperides with Atlantis. Avalon was also called Inis Vitrius, the island of glass towers, the island of the dead, formerly located on the territory of the Great Kingdom in the Atlantic Ocean. Since then, Avalon has been associated with Glastonbury Tor, roughly speaking Glass Tower Hill. It's a high hill in Somerset, England. During the Bronze Age, this place was an island crossed by watercourses resembling the concentric layout of the island of Atlantis. Underscoring this illusion is the spiral pathway that spreads upward from the Tor, because Plato described Atlantis as having been originally laid out in the pattern of the sacred spiral. In Geoffrey of Monmouth Vita Merlini, Avalon is called the Fortunate Isle, the same title classical Greek and Roman writers assigned to Atlantic islands generally and to Atlantis specifically. The Welsh Inis Avalach and the English Inis Vitrius were known along the Normandy coast as the island of Ys, which disappeared beneath the waves. Avalon is also a town in Burgundy named after the sunken island city, because some of its survivors reached Brittany. We know who Julius Caesar was. We know about his military campaigns in the Gaul. But who were the Druids really? Modern society presents Druids as fairy tale wizards, but this is just a myth. And again, a lot of what I bring is from a very detailed Russian research, largely unknown in the Western world, but I hope you find it interesting. So the Druid people lived in the British Isles and in the lands of Western Europe since the 3rd millennium BC. These are priests and warriors of Celtic tribes who possessed real secret knowledge. The most secret tree for them was the oak. For a long time, only the works of ancient Romans and Greek authors were proof of the existence of the Druids. However, at the end of the 20th century, it was possible to find their graves. The disappearance of the Druids is attributed to the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar and his soldiers. Well, nowadays there are modern followers of their culture or Druidry. Druids are associated with Celtic tribes who lived in the period from the 3rd millennium BC to the 5th century AD. They settled in the territories of Central and Western Europe and again in the British Isles. They were pagan priests, or as they were more often called, Celtic priests. There are several assumptions about the origin of the word Druid. The ancient Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder assumed that the word has Greek roots and comes from the word drus, which means oak. Translated from the Gaulish language, it is a wizard, and from Irish, it is an oak tree man. Historians emphasize that the Druids possessed special knowledge that can be regarded as magic. They were excellent healers and got rid of ailments. Special potions were prepared from medicinal herbs. They predicted possessed clairvoyance and were able to guess at cards. They participated in court cases and disputes, helped resolve conflicts. They knew and kept legends and mythical poems. They passed them on to their followers. They were engaged in astronomical calculations, using places of power with a cluster of ancient stones for this purpose. Stonehenge remains the most striking example of this. And I should say, as the researcher of Russian paranormal phenomena, you should look at the Altai mountains, and I bring you stories from there. And other parts of Eurasia. Now, it is known that Druids performed religious rites with sacrifice. There are historical facts confirming that people, criminals or prisoners, were sacrificed, doing it with special rigidity and indifference. Such actions surprised and amazed even the Roman soldiers themselves, who had seen a lot. In this case, they acted as a link between the people and gods. Some historians believe that there is not significant evidence that Druids subjected people to death by sacrificing them. Interestingly, the main shrine for the Druids were not gods at all, but trees, especially oak and the parasite plant mistletoe. Oak was considered a mighty and majestic tree with powerful energy. This is why the Druids arranged their sanctuaries in oak groves. The branches of this tree were used in various rituals. The Druids of Roman Britain were a sect of religious leaders, philosophers, healers, and royal advisors in the Celtic and British society. But ancient Roman authors, such as Caesar and Tacitus, perceived the Druids of Gaul and Britain as savages. According to their beliefs, Druids took place in strange rituals that may have required human sacrifices. According to Caesar, who encountered the Druids in Gaul, they were an important class of Gallic society. The Druids recognized the only leader who ruled the group until his death. They met at a sacred site in Gaul every year, where Britain remained the center of Druid studies. Caesar notes that Druids who wanted to continue Druid training often made pilgrimages to Britain, which sometimes lasted more than 20 years to improve their knowledge. Druids did not take part in the war and were exempt from military taxes and conscription. Instead, they studied knowledge, medicine, astrology, and philosophy from among many other subjects. According to Caesar, they did not record their practice but used the Greek alphabet. Caesar's most disturbing record is the practice of human sacrifice, for which the Druids used criminals, according to this source. The sacrifice would be conducted through burning in the wicker man. The wicker man was a large wicker effigy in which the body was placed. However, archaeology has not provided any evidence of this practice or its connection with the Druids. Indeed, it is possible that Caesar exaggerated specific claims to illustrate the conquest of Gaul and Britain. He portrayed Druids as both scientists and barbarians. But how much his story is exaggerated, we will probably never know. The Annals of Tacitus, written in the 1st century AD, are the only source for the Druids of Roman Britannia. As other Roman sources, many discussed the presence of Druids in Gaul and its environment. That's modern France. Tacitus' accounts took place during the Roman invasion of Anglesey in Wales, where Britain was under the control of the Roman Suetonius Paulinus. Paulinus was preparing an attack on the inhabited island of Mona, Anglesey, if I pronounce it right. Tacitus wrote that as soon as the Roman infantry landed on the island, they were met by an opposing army, which included women dressed in black and Druids. The Druids raised their hands to the sky and shouted terrible curses that terrified the Roman soldiers. Roman troops stood motionless in front of an unfamiliar sight. When the generals led their troops forward, the defenders of the island were defeated, and some soldiers were sent to destroy the sacred groves. These groves, according to Tacitus, were dedicated to inhuman superstitions, since the Druids considered it their duty to cover the altars with the blood of captives. Druids also consulted their deities using human entrails. Tacitus wrote very hostile about the Druids, and this scripture was also adopted by later Roman writers. Interestingly, recent archaeological discoveries have confirmed Anglesea's status as a Druid island. Marcus Tullius Cicero, a contemporary of Caesar, also recorded his experience with the Gallic Druids. In his book on divination, Cicero claims that he met a Gallic Druid from the Aedui tribe named Divitiacus, who knew a lot about natural world and was engaged in divination by reading predictions. Another, less extensive report is taken from the historical library of Diodorus Siculus. Writing around 36 BC, Diodorus described the Druid order and their role in Celtic society. Among these roles, Diodorus notes that Druids were theologians and philosophers, bards and singers. These roles correspond to those described by Caesar and those later repeated by Strabo. Strabo's geography, although also dating back to the beginning of the 1st century AD, discussed the role of the Druids in Celtic society. Among the Gauls in particular, the Druids occupied three honorary positions. The first and most respected position was the bard or bardol, consisting of singers and poets who retold fairy tales and legends. The second position was that the Druids had special knowledge about the natural world and practiced divination, known as Ovates. The last honorary position was that of a philosopher or Druid. Pliny the Elder is another Roman author of the 1st century AD. In the Natural History, Pliny described the role of mistletoe in Druidic ceremonies. He stated that the plant is sacred and is always used in rituals. He noted that the oak was also sacred. Certain rituals were performed in oak groves. For the Druids, everything that came from the oak came directly from heaven, and the appearance of mistletoe was proof that the tree was divine. Pliny further describes a religious ritual in which mistletoe was a key component and notes that Druids practiced ritual cannibalism by eating the flesh of their enemies to gain spiritual powers. It was only after the British Isles were converted to Christianity in the Middle Ages that any writings about the Druids appeared in Britain. However, by this time, the ancient Druids described by Roman authors had largely disappeared. Irish and Welsh stories were also recorded not by members of the Druid order, but by Christian monks. Consequently, by the time these stories were recorded in the 7th and 8th centuries, the Druids had moved into the realm of legends. Irish literary sources, namely Uriach Beck, describe the Druids as having supernatural abilities. In this literature, Druids have become more associated with magical powers and predictions than their ancient predecessors. The Irish Fili or Fulid was a class similar to the Ovates described by Strabo. According to Uriach Beck, this Fili occupied a higher position in the Celtic society than the Druids. The appearance of Druids in Welsh literature is much rarer than in Irish. Most of the Welsh descriptions date back to the 10th century Hyvel Da, which sets out the laws concerning Druids. Welsh stories about the Druids connected them not with sorcerers and wizards, but with prophets and ancient priests. Roman and Christian stories should not be taken literally. According to some scientists, many Roman authors had their own agenda, and therefore it is difficult to determine what is fact and what is fiction. After all, as a rule, the best source of information about the presence of Druids in Gaul, and especially in Britain, is archaeological evidence. Unlike literary sources, archaeological evidence has no motive to convince the audience and has no political agenda. Well, it did in the Soviet Union, but let's leave it alone for now. A common misconception is that the Druids were responsible for the construction of Stonehenge and the stone circles in Avebury. But thanks to archaeological achievements, it is now known that these structures were built about 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ahead of the ancient Druids. Also, thanks to archaeological evidence, it is now known about the existence of Druids in the areas around the British Isles. In 1996, a skeleton was found in Colchester, buried along with medical equipment, divination tools, and herbs. The burial of the skeleton, called the Druid of Colchester, dates back to the 1st century AD. Many archaeologists have tried to prove early Roman accounts of Druids and Druidic practices in Gaul and Britain. The most interesting of these practices would be the human sacrifice described by Caesar and Tacitus. The discovery of a Lindo man in the English swamp in the 1980s has implications for possible human sacrifice by the Celts. The corpse was identified as a young man with a high social status. Research has shown that the body was indeed a human sacrifice and that the victim was killed by blunt force, strangulation, and throat cutting. His death has been dated to around 60 AD, and scholars have suggested that he was sacrificed to convince the gods to stop the Roman offensive against the Celts. Although there are few accounts of the Druids in Roman Britain, and they should be treated with caution, archaeology has again provided the missing details. Many scholars rejected Druidic human sacrifice and cannibalism as Roman propaganda. However, given recent archaeological discoveries, it may be necessary to revise the Roman accounts. Well, but we're looking for more confirmation of the existence of Druids, who may be the descendants of those who once lived in Atlantis. It turns out that for a long time mankind was afraid of Druids, again, thanks to ancient writings and legends. However, no finds of burials could be found. Well, apparently, because of Colchester, British archaeologists were able to refute the myths about them and to confirm that these people really existed. In a sand quarry near Colchester, Great Britain, during archaeological excavations, several burials were found. Studies have confirmed that their age dates back to 50-60 years AD. One of the graves belonged to an ancient Druid. In addition to the remains, they managed to find out a set of tools for the surgical interventions and various magical items. The results of the research were published in the journal British Archaeology. By the way, editor and archaeologist Michael Pitts took part in the research. The subject of Druids had been bothering him for a long time. Therefore, Pitts collected and studied all possible information about them. The most complete description of this Celtic or Celtic priest was found by the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar. In his book, we already mentioned before, now, he managed not only to describe the Druids in detail, but also to tell about their way of life, lifestyle, and magical abilities. Caesar also mentioned that the Druids were particularly cruel and sacrificial people, meaning they like to sacrifice. Other authors from ancient Rome and Greece also wrote them, and this is interesting, I want to repeat. Tacitus called them hostile people. The Roman army was severely attacked by them when they landed on the island of Anglesey, Wales. Perhaps they were just defending territory from outsiders, and this is quite a normal reaction. In response, the Romans destroyed their sacred oak groves. Pliny the Elder and Cicero wrote about the Druids in their works. Well, again, for the Caesar to exterminate the Druids, he had his own reasons, and we mentioned them, but little is really known about this ancient Celtic priests. Again, according to historical information, the ancient Druids disappeared from the face of the earth before the 7th century. However, new stories about them began to appear in Britain. The authors of these works were Christian monks, not representatives of the Druid order. There was no friendship between the Druids and the Romans. With the arrival of the latter, the Celtic priests rapidly lost their former influence in the country. Therefore, they lived by the idea and desire to start war against the Rome. Emperor Julius Caesar, on the one hand, admired their knowledge and capabilities. On the other hand, he perceived these people as enemies who needed to be destroyed. Therefore, Roman troops under the leadership of Caesar unceremoniously destroyed sacred places, trees and altars, and the Druids themselves. The main sanctuary of the Druids was located on the island of Mona. After the destruction of this place and all the Druids who were there, the era ended. Those who survived eventually lost all knowledge and capabilities, and now Druids have become just a legend. So he not only destroyed them, Julius Caesar, as enemies, but he prevented, because they prevented him from conquering territories. He saw them as a threat and a problem for the Roman Empire and his power. Druids had a strong spirit, a different religion, and did not want to submit to another ruler. In addition, they were politically active, and they had a very strong foundation of the Celtic tribes. Having destroyed the ancient Druids, Caesar was able to conquer the northern territories of Europe without hindrance. So the backbone of the Celtic tribes was exterminated. But some historians believe that Julius Caesar failed to completely destroy the Druids. That's interesting, because since the 11th and 12th century, there's practically no information about them. But perhaps these people simply carefully conceal their existence, continuing to worship their shrines, and have preserved the knowledge. This culture has aroused particular interest among people nowadays, since the 20th century. The fact is that ancient Druids passed their knowledge from mouth to mouth. Officially, we know that they didn't leave behind any documentary chronicles. In the modern world, people began to appear who worship the spirits of nature and call themselves Druids, or wannabe Druids. They present themselves to a society as followers of Celtic priests, carriers of their knowledge. However, the current, it has nothing to do with the ancient Druids. In Britain, by the way, in 2010, Druidism was even officially recognized as a religion. I think there are about 20,000 Britons who call themselves Druid followers. I am sure that we'll find out more about the Druids, and maybe through that, their connection to the ancient Atlantis. It will take archaeology definitely to do it, but I'd like you to watch my video again about this Society of Nine and the knowledge that they have accumulated through thousands of years and what they plan to do with this knowledge. And look through my channel, you'll find other interesting videos that pertain to such secret societies and ancient knowledge that goes back, and some of the people who knew a lot about it, such as Ivan Yefremov, this strange Soviet genius and scientist, and what the KGB considered him to be. It's all interconnected. Please support my research through the links you'll find in the description to this video. Please like my video and tell others about my channel. Thank you.